This scandal is totally appalling, but it is also unsurprising, and that's because it's a microcosm of what ails the Democratic elites. That's our Why It Matters segment for the night. The latest revelations join others in which suspected Somali fraudsters stole more than $9 billion in federal funds from 14 state-run agencies dating back to 2018. Somali Americans make up 89% of the defendants charged. The absolute scale of the fraud just beggars belief. Where were the spot checks? Where were the officials? It seems totally impossible that the Democratic leadership was not somehow in on this. Just think about how outrageous this is. You are wondering whether you can afford to have another child because childcare is so expensive. Meanwhile, a group of Somalis in Minnesota got $110 million for childcare centers that don't exist. You can't afford to buy a home, but 100 Somalis spent millions on luxury properties, millions of your taxpayer dollars. You're paying $30,000 a year for terrible health care, and they got millions for healthcare centers that they never opened for patients that they never serviced. But the fraud is a microcosm of an illness that plagues our political elites, especially on the left. More broadly, everybody comes before you. For decades, the Democrats have pushed for mass migration, both legal and illegal, which drove down the wages of working-class Americans while making competition for housing, healthcare, and an education, the hallmarks of the American dream, even fiercer. And if you objected, if you had the audacity to ask why your children were being disinherited in your country, the Democratic elites called you racist. Leftist American elites developed an entire woke vocabulary as a smokescreen to mask the mass pillaging of the American working class. They smeared hardworking people who work 10 times harder than they do, by the way, and make a fraction as much. When those working class Americans objected to having their jobs sent overseas and those jobs that remained here degraded by a glut of cheap labor. Millionaires on cable news called you racist if you said, wait a minute, why don't my kids matter? That's why people are so angry about the Somali fraud case. It is the epitome of the fraud perpetrated on the American people through the collusion of the Democratic Party, the liberal media, and people willing to take advantage of the immense generosity of the American people and then spit in our faces.